I married a pastor and discovered hell. Grandma confesses she married a pastor. She left everything behind to marry a charismatic pastor who claimed to be chosen by God. Years later, she lived in isolation, without a voice, without a career, and afraid even to think. But a letter, a mentor, and the courage to say enough changed everything. Today, she teaches that true faith doesn't control, it liberates. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Sarah Mitchell gazed at the sunset through the window of her apartment in Miami Beach. Her eyes, now framed by deep wrinkles, still maintained the sparkle of someone who had lived her 85 years intensely. Her wrinkled hands leafed through an old diary, yellowed by time, but preserved as her most precious possession. Each page was a piece of her history, a history she rarely shared, but now felt the need to revisit. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Lucy, her granddaughter, who came to visit her as she did every Friday. "Grandma, I brought those cheese rolls you love so much," said the young woman, hugging her grandmother affectionately. Sarah smiled, feeling her granddaughter's gentle perfume. How she loved this girl who represented everything she had achieved: freedom, genuine love, and the possibility of choice. "Thank you, dear. I was just reviewing some memories," replied Sarah, indicating the diary on the table. Lucy looked curiously at the old notebook. "Is that the diary you always mention but never let me read?" Sarah took a deep breath. Perhaps it was time to share her story. Our story that began more than 50 years ago, when she was just a young teacher full of dreams and ideals. "Sit down, Lucy. I think it's time for you to know my true journey." It was in 1970, when Sarah was 33 years old and taught passionately at a public school in Chicago. Single, independent, and respected by her colleagues and students, she believed her life was finally taking the direction she had always desired. The daughter of a simple family from rural Michigan, she had earned her place through much study and determination. It was during an education conference that Sarah met Pastor Anthony Ford, a charismatic man who was beginning to gain notoriety for his inspiring lectures and his new interpretation of the scriptures. He wasn't a traditional pastor. He led his own spiritual movement that attracted people from various religious denominations. He had a way of speaking that seemed to touch our souls directly, Sarah told her granddaughter. His words sounded like poetry, as if each phrase was specially crafted to answer exactly our deepest doubts. After the lecture, Sarah approached him with some questions about spiritual education. The conversation, which should have lasted only a few minutes, extended for hours. Anthony invited her to visit his congregation, the Divine Light Community. Something in that invitation awakened an uncontrollable curiosity in Sarah, who promptly accepted. The congregation operated in an old but well-maintained mansion in the Liberty District. From her first visit, Sarah felt welcomed like never before. Smiling women received her with warm hugs. Men greeted her respectfully. There was an atmosphere of peace and harmony that contrasted with the competitive and cold world she faced daily. The midday visits became frequent. Gradually, Sarah began to adapt her routine to participate in more community activities: prayer meetings on Wednesdays, Bible studies on Saturdays, community lunches on Sundays. Her life began to revolve around that place, and mainly around Anthony. "It was as if I was hypnotized," confessed Sarah, her eyes lost in memories. Each of his words seemed like a divine revelation, each gesture a blessing. The relationship evolved quickly. Anthony began to give special attention to Sarah, inviting her to private conversations after meetings, asking for her opinion on texts and biblical interpretations, valuing her academic background. "You have a special gift, Sarah," he would say. "God placed you in my path for a reason. Together, we can do extraordinary work." 3 months after they met, during a special ceremony in the community, Anthony made a surprising announcement. "I've had a divine revelation," he declared, before all the members. "God showed me that Sarah and I must unite in matrimony to strengthen our spiritual work." Sarah's heart raced. She had never thought about marriage, much less with a spiritual leader. Her life was dedicated to teaching, to the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. But there was something in Anthony's gaze, in the way everyone looked at her with admiration and expectation, that made her feel special, chosen. "I felt like the most blessed woman in the world," Sarah told her granddaughter, a sad smile forming on her lips. "I thought God was offering me an extraordinary path, a divine mission." The wedding was celebrated in a simple but moving ceremony. Just a month later, community members organized everything, from the decoration to the buffet. Sarah wore a simple white dress made by one of the ladies of the congregation. Her parents, reluctant about the speed of events, attended, but visibly concerned. Her work colleagues showed surprise at the sudden relationship. "I'm sure you know what you're doing," said Claire, her best friend and colleague, hugging her after the ceremony, a tone of concern in her voice that Sarah preferred to ignore. In the first weeks of marriage, everything seemed like a dream. Anthony was attentive, affectionate, and treated Sarah with admiration and respect. They moved to a modest house near the community headquarters, decorated with gifts received from members. It was during a conversation about the academic semester planning that the first sign of change appeared. Sarah was talking animatedly about new pedagogical projects when Anthony gently interrupted her. "My dear, I've been thinking about your work at school. Don't you think it would be more valuable to dedicate your knowledge entirely to our community? The children here need proper spiritual guidance so much." Sarah hesitated. She loved her profession, her students, the financial independence her work provided. But she also wanted to please her husband, contribute to the mission he led. "I can think about it, but I really love teaching at school," she responded cautiously. Anthony's demeanor changed subtly. A slight furrowing of the brows, an almost imperceptible stiffening of the jaw. "I understand your attachment to the secular world, Sarah, but remember what the scriptures teach us about a wife's submission. Wives, submit to your husbands, as to the Lord. Your mission now is to support the work God has entrusted to me." Those words, spoken with such gentleness but with an unquestionable firmness, caused a strange discomfort in Sarah. There was something in the way he used the scriptures that seemed to leave no room for discussion. "I'll pray about it," was all she could respond. In the following weeks, the pressure increased. Anthony began to question Sarah's schedules, to ask in detail about her conversations with other teachers, to suggest that she was divided in her loyalty. Community members began to approach her with phrases like, "What a blessing it would be to have you teaching our children full-time," or "A true spiritual leader's wife needs to be fully dedicated to the work." Gradually, Sarah felt cornered. The school environment, which had once been her refuge, became tense. Anthony occasionally appeared at the end of the day, observed her interactions with colleagues, made comments about her clothes being inappropriately flashy for a married woman. One night, after a particularly intense discussion, Sarah gave in. She requested a leave from school, initially temporary, to dedicate herself to personal projects. The principal, who had known her for years, looked at her with concern. "Are you sure, Sarah? You've always been so passionate about teaching." "It's just a break," replied Sarah, avoiding the questioning look of her superior. "I need to dedicate more time to my family life now." On the day she left school, carrying a box with her belongings, Sarah felt a tightness in her chest, as if she were abandoning an essential part of herself, but she consoled herself thinking she was following a higher calling, a divine mission alongside the man she loved. Little did she know that this would be just the first of many pieces of her identity she would be forced to abandon in the years to come. Adapting to the new life was harder than Sarah could have imagined. Without her work at school, her days were filled with activities in the religious community. Initially, Anthony introduced her as the brilliant teacher God brought to enrich our work, but gradually this identity was replaced by the dedicated wife of the leader. "The changes were so subtle that I barely noticed what was happening," Sarah explained to her granddaughter, while serving a cup of chamomile tea. "It's like that story of the frog in water that gradually heats up until it boils, when you realize it's too late." The house they shared, initially a space of intimacy and affection, progressively transformed into an extension of the community. Members appeared without warning, often staying late into the night for prayer meetings or planning. Privacy became a rare luxury. The savings that Sarah had accumulated during years of work began to be directed to the needs of the work. First, they were small contributions to help needy families in the community, something she did with genuine satisfaction. Then came more significant requests: a renovation in the main hall, sound equipment for services, teaching materials for Sunday classes. "We need to be an example of generosity," Anthony would say, with that intense look that admitted no questioning. "How can I ask others if we ourselves don't give everything we have?" In a few months, Sarah's savings account, the result of more than a decade of disciplined work, was practically empty. When she mentioned concern about retirement, Anthony responded with a serene smile. "God will provide, my dear. Doesn't it say in the scriptures that we should seek first the kingdom, and all these other things will be added to us?" True faith doesn't worry about tomorrow. Sarah's routine became rigidly controlled. She woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare Anthony's coffee exactly as he liked it. Then she took care of cleaning the house, prepared materials for Bible studies, attended to the women of the community who came seeking counsel, cooked for meetings, organized charity events. When she tried to suggest some changes in teaching, methods for the children, using her pedagogical experience, she was gently silenced. "I appreciate your dedication, Sarah, but our method is already established according to the vision I received." "Let's remain faithful to it," Anthony would say, caressing her face in a way that made her feel simultaneously valued and diminished. The control extended to all aspects of her life. Her clothes began to be chosen according to the standards of modesty established by Anthony. Her hair, once loose and natural, was now always tied in a discreet bun. Makeup became forbidden, considered worldly vanity. Her old friendships were gradually pushed away. First, Anthony questioned the dubious spirituality of her teacher friends. Then he suggested that contact with people of the world could contaminate the spiritual purity they were building in the community. Claire, her closest friend, tried to maintain contact, but after some tense visits, in which Anthony remained present throughout the conversation, directing it with subtle comments, the meetings became increasingly rare until they ceased completely. "She never understood our mission," Anthony commented after Claire's last visit. "People like her can be a negative influence on your spiritual growth." Sarah's family was also pushed away. Her parents, already elderly, called regularly, concerned about their daughter's growing isolation. Anthony usually answered the phone, responding cordially but briefly, claiming that Sarah was busy with important work for the community. When Sarah's mother fell ill and asked her daughter to visit, Anthony initially seemed understanding, but on the eve of the trip, he organized a special event in the community that could not happen without Sarah's presence. The visit was postponed and eventually cancelled. Sarah's mother died without her being able to say goodbye. "She's in a better place now," Anthony consoled. "And you fulfilled your most important role by remaining faithful to the mission God gave us. That's what really matters in eternity." The only family tie that Sarah managed to preserve, albeit fragilely, was with her younger sister, Teresa. The conversations, once long and intimate, became superficial and tense, always monitored by Anthony's presence or by some trusted member of the community when he could not be present. Sarah's health began to deteriorate under constant pressure. Frequent headaches, insomnia, loss of appetite. When she suggested consulting a doctor, Anthony organized a special prayer vigil. Medicine has its place, but for people of faith like us, healing comes primarily through prayer and repentance. Perhaps these pains are a sign that you need to surrender more completely to the work. The vigil lasted all night. Sarah, exhausted and feverish, was the center of the prayers. Members laid hands on her, prophesied, spoke in tongues. Anthony, with a powerful voice, rebuked spirits of infirmity and rebellion that would be afflicting his wife. The next day, still sick, Sarah was instructed to continue her normal activities as a demonstration of faith. She fainted during the preparation of the community lunch, and only then did Anthony allow her to be taken to the hospital. The diagnosis, extreme exhaustion and severe anemia. During the brief hospitalization, Sarah experienced something she hadn't felt in a long time: solitude. Anthony appeared only for short periods, always accompanied by community members, never allowing moments of privacy. It was in that small hospital room that Sarah found a moment of clarity. An elderly nurse, noticing her lost look, sat beside her during the night shift. "You don't look well, and I'm not just talking about the anemia," the nurse commented gently. "I've seen that look before. It's the look of someone trapped in an invisible cage." Sarah felt tears well up. How long had it been since she'd cried? How long had it been since she was really seen by someone? "I don't know what you're talking about," she answered automatically, the fear of being disloyal to Anthony still controlling her words. The nurse smiled understandingly. "It's okay, I just want you to know that there are people who can help when you're ready." Discreetly, she left a small card on the nightstand beside the bed. Sarah hid the card, which contained only a name, Dr. Helen Campbell, and a phone number. She never called that number, but kept the card in a small seam she made in the hem of a skirt. A tiny secret that represented a possibility, a door that might one day be opened. Upon returning home, Sarah found significant changes. During her absence, Anthony had reorganized her office, eliminating the few books of literature and pedagogy she still kept. "We need to focus only on what spiritually edifies," he explained. "These worldly books only distract your mind from the true mission." It was also after the hospitalization that Sarah discovered a disturbing aspect of the community's finances. Anthony announced ambitious plans for the construction of a new temple, much larger than the current one. A project that would cost millions and would be a milestone for the expansion of the work. During an administrative meeting, to which Sarah was exceptionally invited due to her miraculous recovery, treasurers presented vague and incomplete financial reports. When she tried to ask specific questions about the amounts collected and projected expenses, she was gently reminded that financial matters are the responsibility of men designated by God for such a function. One night, when the community was facing difficulties in raising funds for the new construction, Anthony organized a special dinner for potential major donors. Sarah was instructed to prepare an elaborate banquet using the last personal financial reserves of the couple. "We need to impress these people," explained Anthony. "They need to see prosperity and abundance to trust the vision God gave me." The dinner was a success. Generous donations were promised. Anthony was radiant. But that night, something definitely broke inside Sarah. Observing her husband surrounded by adulation and power, she saw clearly what was happening. It wasn't about spirituality or divine mission. It was about control, power, and money. It was that night that Sarah started her secret diary. With a small notebook she managed to buy discreetly during a rare authorized shopping trip, she began to record her reality, her thoughts, her fears. It was like creating a mirror, where she could still recognize herself, a space where her voice still existed. "Today marks 2 years since I stopped being a teacher," she wrote on the first page. 2 years since I began to disappear." The diary became her refuge, carefully hidden inside a pillow whose lining she skillfully modified. She wrote only when she had absolute certainty of being alone, usually during the early hours, when Anthony slept deeply after his exhausting preaching. It was through those secret pages that Sarah began to re-examine each moment since she met Anthony, each decision, each renunciation. Gradually, the fog of devotion and submission began to dissipate, revealing the skillful manipulation she had been subjected to. "It was like waking from a trance," she told her granddaughter, her eyes now focused on the present. But waking, while still trapped in the dream, is perhaps the most painful form of awakening. And it was precisely when Sarah was beginning this inner awakening that Anthony's behavior underwent an alarming transformation. The calculated gentleness began to give way to increasingly frequent outbursts of anger, especially when his suggestions or decisions were questioned, even subtly. The first truly frightening episode happened when Sarah, moved by the situation, of an elderly lady from the community who couldn't afford to buy her medications, set aside a small amount from the fund destined for the new temple works to help her. When Anthony discovered what Sarah had done with the construction money, his reaction was devastating. For the first time, the mask of spiritual benevolence fell completely. "How dare you," he thundered, his face contorted in an expression that Sarah had never witnessed before. That money was consecrated to God. It was dedicated to the construction of his house. "You profaned something sacred." Sarah tried to explain the desperate situation of the elderly lady, but each word only intensified Anthony's fury. He pushed her against the wall, holding her by the shoulders with such force that it left marks. "Scripture is clear about disobedient women," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You are being guided by a spirit of rebellion. We need to root it out." What followed was a session of spiritual deliverance before selected members of the community. Sarah was exposed as an example of demonic influence, forced to kneel while Anthony and other leaders laid hands on her, rebuking spirits of independence and disobedience. "Forgive me, Lord, for my weakness," murmured Sarah, tears silently streaming down. But inside her something was strengthening instead of breaking. The public humiliation ignited a spark of indignation that no amount of spiritual manipulation could extinguish. That night, alone in the bathroom, Sarah examined the bruises on her shoulders. She looked at herself in the mirror, really looked for the first time in years. The face that stared back was almost unrecognizable, pale, thin, with deep, dark circles and a dull gaze. But in her eyes, there was something new, a flicker of determination. "This isn't devotion," she whispered to herself. "This is prison." In the following weeks, the surveillance over Sarah intensified. Her correspondence was opened before reaching her hands. Her outings were always accompanied. Her time was entirely controlled. The house phone was moved to Anthony's office, making any private communication practically impossible. It was during this period of extreme isolation that Sarah met Mrs. Elizabeth, a widow of about 70 who had recently moved to the neighborhood. Unlike other community members, Elizabeth had an air of tranquil independence, an observant and perceptive look. During a charity event, the two were assigned to organize clothing donations. Working side by side, they initially talked about trivial matters, but there was something in the way Elizabeth listened, really listened, that made Sarah gradually lower her guard. "You used to be a teacher, weren't you?" asked Elizabeth casually while folding a pile of coats. Sarah nodded, surprised. "How do you know?" "I recognize the look," smiled Elizabeth. "That unique mixture of intellectual curiosity and patience. I was a school principal for 30 years. The eyes of an educator have a special light." Something in that observation touched Sarah deeply. Someone could still see the teacher in her, even after so many years. That identity she thought had been completely erased still existed. "I miss it," confessed Sarah in a low voice, quickly looking around to make sure no one was listening. "I miss teaching." Elizabeth's gaze conveyed understanding, but also something more, a kind of silent warning. "The things we love never completely abandon us," she said. "They just wait for the right moment to bloom again." That brief encounter marked the beginning of a carefully cultivated friendship. Elizabeth was a member of the community, but occupied a peculiar position. As a respected and relatively wealthy widow, she enjoyed a freedom that other women did not have. Anthony treated her with special deference, aware of the generous donations she made. Taking advantage of this privileged position, Elizabeth began to frequently request Sarah's help to organize her library. These moments in Elizabeth's house became precious to Sarah. Away from the watchful eyes of the community, the two women could converse freely. Elizabeth, prudent and perceptive, never criticized Anthony directly. Instead, she gradually introduced Sarah to carefully selected books, works on psychology, spirituality, and most significantly, on abusive relationships disguised as religious devotion. "This one helped me a lot when I went through a difficult period," Elizabeth would say, offering a book that Sarah read avidly during her visits, always leaving it at her friend's house. "Sometimes we need other voices to understand our own situation more clearly." It was during one of these visits that Elizabeth, after making sure they were really alone, revealed something that would change everything. "I'm not new to the divine. Light community, Sarah," she confessed, her gaze suddenly serious. "I was here before, many years ago, as a member, as the wife of one of the first leaders who joined Anthony." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened?" "The same story that I see repeating with you," Elizabeth replied softly. "Gradual control, isolation, spiritual manipulation, eventual physical abuse, all justified with carefully selected biblical passages." In a calm voice, Elizabeth told how she had been entangled in a similar relationship, how her husband had become Anthony's right-hand man in the early days of the community, how she too had lost her identity, her resources, her voice. "How did you escape?" asked Sarah, her voice almost inaudible. "I realized that the prison I was in had no real locks," answered Elizabeth. "The chains were made of fear, guilt, and false interpretations of faith. Once I understood this, I began to plan my exit. It wasn't easy nor quick, but it was possible." Elizabeth had divorced, rebuilt her life, found authentic spirituality away from controlling structures. Now, years later, she was returning with a purpose. "I'm here because I've seen other women going through the same," she explained, "including you. I came to offer what no one offered me, a helping hand, a way out." That conversation planted in Sarah the seeds of true liberation. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of a life beyond the walls of the community, beyond Anthony's control. "But how?" she asked, fear still intertwined with nascent hope. "I don't have my own money. I have nowhere to go. I have no contacts outside of here." "Let's start with small steps," advised Elizabeth. "First, we need to recover your confidence, your identity. The rest will come naturally." Following Elizabeth's guidance, Sarah began to save small amounts of money from the household budget, hiding them inside an old Bible, whose spine she had carefully modified to create a secret compartment. They were negligible amounts, but they represented the beginning of financial independence. She also began to subtly re-establish contact with her sister Teresa. During the rare permitted visits, always watched, Sarah developed a discreet code to communicate that not everything was, well, small, seemingly innocent phrases that Teresa, intuitive and concerned, slowly began to understand. When Anthony announced plans for the construction of an apartment annexed to the new temple, where he and Sarah would live for full dedication to the work, she realized her time was running out. The move would mean constant surveillance, without any space for privacy or planning. It was Elizabeth who suggested the boldest step. "You need to go back to studying." The proposal initially seemed absurd. Anthony would never allow it. But Elizabeth was astute. "We'll present it as a ministerial strategy," she explained. "I'll argue that your updated pedagogical training will be a differential to attract middle-class families to the community. An evening supplementary course focused on modern educational techniques." To Sarah's surprise, the plan worked. Anthony, always attentive to appearances and community growth, accepted the idea, especially when presented by Elizabeth, whose influence and donations he valued. "Just remember the purpose of this," he warned Sarah. "It's for the work, not for personal satisfaction or worldly ambitions." The supplementary course became Sarah's window to the outside world. Twice a week, she attended evening classes in the downtown area. Although initially accompanied by some trusted member of the community, she gradually won the right to go alone, arguing that the presence of babysitters hindered her concentration and interaction with other educators. It was in the academic environment that Sarah began to fully awaken. Discussions about pedagogy evolved into reflections on philosophy, psychology, human rights. Teachers noticed her intelligence and practical experience, valuing her contributions. Colleagues included her in study groups, offering the intellectual camaraderie she had missed so much. Most significantly, it was through a lecture on women's rights that Sarah became aware of the recent divorce law, enacted in 1977. For the first time, she glimpsed a legal and concrete way out of her marriage. Discreetly, she began to collect information, make notes, prepare herself mentally and practically. Her secret diary now contained not just outpourings, but concrete plans, dates, useful contacts, legal resources. Meanwhile, the financial situation of the community deteriorated. The ambitious new temple project faced problems: underestimated costs, unfulfilled donation promises, questioning from members about the lack of transparency in the accounts. The pressure on Anthony increased, reflecting in his increasingly erratic behavior. Sarah found him several times drinking in secret in his office, something he publicly condemned as sin of the flesh. His preaching became more apocalyptic, emphasizing persecution, absolute loyalty, necessary sacrifices. Elizabeth, observing the deterioration of the situation, intensified her advice to Sarah. The moment is approaching. We need to accelerate the preparations. It was during this turbulent period that Sarah noticed the growing proximity between Anthony and Marie, a young secretary recently hired to assist in the administration of the community. The pattern was painfully familiar: the same special attention, the same spiritual compliments, the same aura of divine choice. He's doing to her what he did to me, Sarah realized, observing the interactions between the two. A mixture of compassion and indignation grew within her. Confirmation of her suspicions came in an unexpected way. During an afternoon at Elizabeth's house, while organizing materials for a charity event, they were surprised by a desperate visit. It was Marie, pale and trembling. "I need help," whispered the young woman, nervously looking over her shoulder. "I don't know who to turn to." Between sobs, Marie revealed that she was pregnant by Anthony and that he was pressuring her to have an abortion, something he publicly condemned as one of the worst sins. "He said it's a trial, a test of my loyalty to the work," explained Marie, her voice choked. "He said that God sometimes asks for sacrifices for a greater good." Sarah felt as if the ground disappeared beneath her feet. The manipulation, the hypocrisy, the calculated cruelty, everything reached a new level of devastating clarity. At that moment, any remaining doubt about the need to escape completely dissipated. Elizabeth, always practical, took control of the immediate situation. She helped Marie find safe medical support, assured her that there were alternatives to what Anthony proposed, offered resources and protection. For Sarah, the incident was the final catalyst. That night, alone with her diary, she wrote with renewed determination, "It's not just for me now, it's for all of us. I need to leave not only to save myself, but to break this cycle of abuse. My silence makes me complicit. My escape will be my first act of true resistance." 2 weeks later, Elizabeth fell seriously ill. A severe pneumonia quickly took her to the hospital. Sarah managed to visit her one last time, circumventing Anthony's vigilance with the help of her sister. On the hospital bed, Elizabeth handed Sarah a sealed envelope. "Only open it when you're safe," she instructed, her voice weak but determined. "It contains everything you'll need to start over. The key to a bank vault with savings I've reserved for you, contacts who can help, a place to stay temporarily." Sarah held the wrinkled hand of her mentor, silent tears streaming down her face. "How can I repay everything you've done for me?" she asked. Elizabeth's smile, even weakened by illness, radiated a serene wisdom. "By living free. And when you can, extending a hand to another woman who needs help, as I did with you. That's how we break chains, one at a time." 3 days later, Elizabeth left this world. Her passing was a devastating blow to Sarah, who lost not only a friend, but her main ally and guide. However, even in her absence, Elizabeth continued to guide her. The envelope contained exactly what she had promised, plus a personal letter that Sarah would read and reread in the years to come, seeking strength. In her words, "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I've started my journey beyond this world. Don't grieve for me. I lived long enough to see many women reclaim their freedom, including myself. Now it's your turn. Always remember, some men feed on others' fear, and fear can only be overcome with lucidity and courage. You have both, even if you don't know it yet. True faith liberates, never imprisons. Authentic love elevates, never diminishes. Go forward without looking back. Your real life is just beginning. Elizabeth's passing accelerated Sarah's plans. With Anthony increasingly unstable and Marie's situation worsening, she knew she could no longer wait. The construction of the apartment annex to the temple was almost complete, which meant she would soon lose even the small space of privacy she still possessed. "The time to act is now," Sarah told her granddaughter Lucy while serving another cup of tea. "It was the hardest decision and, paradoxically, the simplest I've ever made in my life." With meticulous precision, Sarah elaborated every detail of her escape. She carefully observed Anthony's routine, memorized his commitments, identified the ideal moment, a weekend when he would travel to a religious congress in another state. In the previous weeks, she discreetly separated essential documents, birth certificate, diplomas, a few personal objects of sentimental value. She kept them in a small bag, hidden in the bottom of a rarely used closet. She continued to accumulate small amounts, now with greater determination. She maintained more regular contact with her sister Teresa, preparing her for what was to come, without revealing details that could compromise the plan if communications were intercepted. She simply said, "Soon I'll need you like never before, be prepared." On the eve of Anthony's trip, Sarah feigned a headache to retire early, avoiding arousing any suspicion. Lying in the darkness, she mulled over each detail of the plan, anticipated obstacles, strengthened her resolution. The next morning, she prepared Anthony's breakfast as she always did, helped him pack his suitcase, said goodbye with the usual submission. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner, Sarah went into action. With quick and precise movements, she gathered her previously separated things, added some basic clothes, not many, to avoid raising immediate suspicions. From the hiding place in the Bible, she retrieved the money saved over months. From her diary, she tore out the most important pages, documenting the abuses suffered. Before leaving, Sarah performed a symbolic gesture that she would later recognize. As her first act of true liberation, she removed her wedding ring, placed it on the meticulously made bed, along with a brief letter. "Anthony, I leave this house not for lack of faith, but for an excess of it. I deeply believe that God does not want us to live in fear, lies, and oppression. What we built here was not a marriage, but a prison. I will now seek what you always preached, but never practiced, a life of authenticity and true love. Don't try to find me. Sarah." With her 2 suitcases and Elizabeth's envelope, Sarah closed the door of that house for the last time. The taxi, previously called to a nearby address to avoid suspicion, was waiting. Her destination, Teresa's apartment, on the other side of the city. The first days of freedom were a contradictory mixture of relief and terror. Every doorbell that rang, every phone that called, every shadow in the window seemed to be Anthony coming to get her. Teresa, understanding the gravity of the situation, implemented security measures, changed locks, installed an intercom system, asked neighbors to be alert for strangers. As Sarah had foreseen, Anthony's reaction was immediate and intense. First came incessant calls to Teresa's apartment, pleading, then threatening. Then unannounced visits, efforts to intercept her on the street. Community members appeared with messages of concern and requests for reconciliation. The pastor is destroyed, they would say. He just wants to talk to understand what happened. Sarah remained firm. Following Elizabeth's advice, she sought out the lawyer indicated in her letter, Dr. Helen Campbell, who specialized in family law and cases of women in vulnerable situations. With her, she initiated divorce proceedings. "The new divorce law is our ally," explained Helen. "Although recent, it gives us the necessary legal support. We can request the divorce for irreconcilable incompatibility without needing his consent." In parallel, Sarah began her professional reconstruction. With the small savings left by Elizabeth, she enrolled in a pedagogical update course. After so many years away, she needed to reconnect with new educational theories and practices. The return to studies was therapeutic. Being again in an academic environment, surrounded by books and intellectual discussions, rekindled a vital part of her identity. Her solid knowledge base combined with her life experience soon distinguished her among colleagues. Anthony's persecution, however, intensified. He began to appear at the college, creating embarrassing situations, approaching colleagues and professors with distorted versions of the facts. His charisma and position as a respected religious leader gave him credibility, further complicating Sarah's situation. "My wife is going through an emotional and spiritual crisis," he would say, with an expression of sincere concern. "We need support to bring her back to reason and faith." Realizing that the situation could compromise her academic reintegration, Sarah made a courageous decision. She told her complete story to the college board. With a firm voice, she detailed the years of psychological abuse, control, and religious manipulation. She showed the pages from her diary, the bruises documented during her hospitalization, the witnesses who could corroborate her version. The institution acted with seriousness and professionalism. Security measures were implemented. Anthony was banned from entering the campus. Staff were alerted. An escort was assigned to accompany Sarah to the bus stop after evening classes. It was during this turbulent period that Sarah received disturbing news. Marie, the young secretary, had attempted to take her own life. Hospitalized in serious condition, she had specifically asked to see Sarah. Despite the risks, Sarah did not hesitate. Accompanied by Teresa and a security guard recommended by her lawyer, she went to the hospital. The sight of Marie, pale and fragile in the hospital bed, awakened a mixture of compassion and anger, not directed at the young woman, but at the system that had nearly destroyed her. "I couldn't be strong like you," murmured Marie, tears streaming down her young face. "After you left, he became different, more aggressive, more controlling. When I refused to do what he asked about the baby, he began to defame me in the community, saying I had seduced him, that I was possessed." Sarah held the young woman's hand firmly. "You are stronger than you imagine. Being here alive is proof of that, and you're no longer alone." In the hospital corridor, Sarah found herself face to face with Anthony for the first time since her departure. He seemed simultaneously arrogant and defeated, a combination she knew well from his moments of crisis. "You destroyed our family, our mission," he accused, keeping his voice low to avoid attracting attention, all out of pride, out of spiritual rebellion. Sarah felt something unusual, not fear, not anger, but a deep and powerful calm. For the first time, she saw Anthony with total clarity, not as the charismatic leader, not as the controlling husband, but simply as an insecure and manipulative man. "There will be no more contact between us, Anthony," she declared, her voice firm and serene. "I have all the evidence I need about your abuses, the diaries, the witnesses, the medical reports. If you continue to persecute me or disturb Marie again, all of this will become public. I have an excellent lawyer and the protection of the law. Your choice now is simple: step away or face the consequences." Something in Sarah's determined look, so different from the submissive woman he had known, made Anthony back down. For the first time, it was he who seemed insecure, disarmed. The following weeks brought a gradual decrease in persecution. The divorce papers were officially delivered, citing irreconcilable incompatibility. After some attempts at contestation, Anthony finally accepted the inevitable. The divorce was finalized at the end of 1979. Sarah, now legally free, felt like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, still fragile, still testing her wings, but irreversibly transformed. With the support of professors who recognized her potential, she secured a supervised internship at a progressive school that valued innovative pedagogical approaches. There, gradually, Sarah relearned how to be a teacher, rediscovering the joy of participating in the intellectual and emotional development of children. Her particular focus turned to children with learning difficulties, especially those from challenging family environments. Her own life experience brought a special sensitivity to identify signs of trauma and abuse, allowing early and effective interventions. Sarah's personal life also gradually flourished. Through a support group for divorced women, which she initially attended as a participant and later as a facilitator, She met Mark, a widowed university professor, with whom she developed a friendship that slowly evolved into a relationship, based on mutual respect and admiration. After everything I experienced with Anthony, I thought I would never be able to trust a man again, Sarah confessed to her granddaughter. But Mark was different in every way. He valued my independence, respected my dreams, never used religion to control or manipulate. After 3 years of relationship, they married in a simple ceremony, surrounded only by close friends and family. Sarah, then 47 years old, didn't expect they could have children, but life had other plans. To the couple's surprise and joy, she became pregnant, giving birth to a healthy girl whom they named Elizabeth, in honor of the woman who had made her liberation possible. Your mother, Sarah explained to Lucy, was born as a symbol of new beginnings, that it's never too late to build a new life. Meanwhile, Anthony's life took a different path. Shortly after the divorce, he married again to a young member of the congregation. His influence, however, began to gradually decline. A series of investigative reports exposed financial irregularities in the management of funds for the new temple, which was never completed. Although he was never formally convicted, the public exposure of the deviations caused a significant exodus of members. Those who remained formed a reduced and increasingly isolated group with increasingly extreme practices. Sarah maintained sporadic contact with Marie, who after recovering moved to Oregon, where she rebuilt her life. She graduated in nursing, married, had 2 children. She found an inclusive and welcoming religious community where she managed to reconcile her faith with a healthy and liberating spirituality. The years passed. Mark died after 4 decades of happy and respectful marriage. Sarah, now a grandmother, remained active in support groups for women in vulnerable situations, especially those involved in abusive relationships masked by religious justifications. "There is no true faith that diminishes the human being," became her mantra, repeated in lectures, meetings, and individual counseling. "Authentic spirituality always liberates, never imprisons." Occasionally, former members of the Divine Light community sought her out, seeking forgiveness for not having perceived or intervened in the abuses she had suffered. Sarah received them with serenity, without resentment. "The system made us all blind," she would say. "Some out of fear, others out of convenience, many out of sincere confusion between devotion and submission. The important thing is that we eventually managed to see." To her grandchildren, Sarah taught the importance of critical thinking, even in matters of faith. She showed them that true spirituality and personal autonomy not only can but must coexist. That genuine love never demands the annulment of the other, but celebrates their uniqueness and potential. True hell, she explained, is not a distant place after life. It's the slow erasure of oneself. It's waking up each day with more fear than hope. It's confusing control with love, submission with virtue. "And paradise?" Sarah smiled as she answered, "It begins right here, in the moment we decide to live, with authenticity, when we understand that no true love requires us to stop being who we are." On the afternoon when Sarah finished telling her story to her granddaughter, the sun was setting again, tinting the Miami Beach sky with shades of orange and pink. Lucy, moved, held her grandmother's hands, finally understanding the depth of this seemingly ordinary woman but extraordinary in her journey. "Why did you decide to tell me all this now, Grandma?" asked Lucy, wiping away tears. Sarah smiled, her eyes now shining with a wisdom gained through decades of struggle and overcoming. "Because you're about to graduate in law, dear, and you've chosen to work with vulnerable women. I want you to understand that behind each client you'll serve, there's a complex story, a web of subtle manipulations often invisible even to the victim herself. I want you to know that your grandmother was one of those women and managed to free herself, and that you, my granddaughter, are part of the legacy of that liberation." Lucy hugged her grandmother tightly, feeling a new purpose strengthen her professional vocation. Now she understood why she had always felt such admiration for this seemingly fragile woman, but with an indomitable spirit. "I promise to honor your story, Grandma. Every woman I can help will also be a tribute to your courage." Sarah caressed her granddaughter's face tenderly. Throughout her life, she had learned that true transformations rarely occur in dramatic grand gestures. More often, they are born from small daily decisions, a page written in a secret diary, an honest question asked at the right time, a hand extended offering not answers, but companionship on the journey. Her own story, which had begun as a fearful whisper in hidden pages, had become a testimony of resistance and hope, now transmitted to a new generation. "True faith," Sarah said softly, as she watched the last ray of sunlight disappear on the horizon, "is not one that binds us to immutable dogmas, but one that gives us courage to question, to grow, to transform. It's believing that even in the darkest circumstances, there is always a path to light." Lucy then understood that her grandmother's story was not just about escaping an abusive relationship. It was about rediscovering her own voice, reclaiming the right to define her own spirituality, her own journey. It was, above all, about the courage to be reborn, even when everything seemed lost. And as the first stars began to dot the night sky of Miami Beach, grandmother and granddaughter remained in contemplative silence, united by a legacy of resistance that transcended generations, a legacy built not with grand proclamations, but with the silent determination of women who refused to disappear. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah's story has deeply touched your hearts. To continue this journey of moving stories that explore the complexity of life and the strength of the human spirit, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging narratives. Find it here by clicking on the link to the left. If this story awakened something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring new stories that inspire, move, and make us reflect on our own journeys. Share your impressions